How can I observe thoughts without judgment? How can I observe intrusive thoughts without judgment? What's up, everyone? My name is Morcie. I'm here as a guide and spiritual teacher. And in today's video, I will be answering that question: how to observe these intrusive thoughts, these disturbing ideas that arise within our mind without warning, unexpectedly. In this video, I'll be sharing with you the reasons why you may find yourself not being able to honor this practice of non-reactivity, non-identification. These are powerful spiritual practices. They're all powerful spiritual practices until they're no longer a practice, until you recognize that this is your natural state of being. An intrusive thought is a disturbing thought, might even be annoying thought that arises within our mind. It's unwanted, it's unexpected. And often what happens when we aren't aware enough is we might begin to identify with it. We might think that because it has arisen within our mind, that it's an indication of our character, or it's an indication of something we desire or want. But it's not. It's actually quite normal for these random thoughts to just arise within the mind. It happens. It's a part of the human experience. And another aspect of the human experience is recognizing that you aren't those thoughts. At least for me, that's how I see it. If you're hearing this video, there's a part of you that knows that. Everything I share here is all just a reminder that you're beyond these thoughts. My words here are pointing you towards presence, pointing towards the wholeness of this moment, without judgment, without critiquing the moment, without expectations of how the moment should be. Points you towards presence. When you're inviting presence in your life, you are non-reactive towards what is arising within the mind. You're not suppressing it, but there is an acceptance and a receiving of the moment as it is, as you remain still, present, here. Noticing how thoughts are their own entity. They're their own entity. They want to stay alive just like any other life form in this world. And often they stay alive through our validation of that thought, through our unconscious choice to identify with it and mistake it as an aspect of our character, right? So I'll say that's reason number one. Reason number one as to why you may find that it's difficult to be in non-reactivity and just to observe thought is that lack of understanding. That not understanding or being aware of the fact that this thought is not a representation of your character. It's not a representation of something you want. Perhaps you were exposed to something, or you were somewhere and you picked up something, all right? For lack of better words, you picked up something, and these thoughts, they started to flow through your mental field. So when we understand the nature of thought, when we understand thought pattern, then we have an expanded understanding. Therefore, this gives us the space to honor non-reactivity, to honor non-identification with the mind. What might come up right now is, okay, so if I'm not the mind, then who am I? That is an essential part of the spiritual awakening journey and process. And if you're here, there's an aspect of you that was drawn towards this, an aspect of you that knows you are beyond the mind. You are beyond thought. You're beyond all this stimulation that's going on through the mental field. You're beyond it. Another reason why you may find yourself having some difficulty with observing thought is this feeling of shame or judgment that might arise due to societal standards, due to what your culture, society might say. I mean, hey, some thoughts arise in the mind and they are very questionable, right? Some might be quite aggressive, some might be just disturbing, all right? And often what we feel is shame. Often what we feel is guilt. I find that in these moments, it's important to recognize that. When we know that this isn't an indication of our character, it's not an indication of any our conscious intentions, perhaps a desire, whatever it might be. When we know that, it makes it easier for us to approach these feelings of shame or guilt with non-reactivity. Often with non-reactivity, we'll recognize that we aren't preferring one emotion over the other. We're not preferring one thought over the other, right? In non-reactivity, when we don't have a preference, good and bad, they don't exist. So we're here fully in the moment, right? That is presence. Presence. Honoring the fullness and the wholeness of the moment and not judging it and critiquing it. That judgment and critique that causes that intensity of the emotions we feel, it makes us feel more shame. It makes us feel more judgment. When we are able to recognize that or recognize societal standards, this gives us the opportunity to be more conscious about our decisions. It gives us the opportunity to not identify with the mind. Another reason why you might find it difficult to be in non-reactivity towards intrusive thoughts, these disturbing thoughts are, I kind of tapped into it. It was uncomfortable emotions. Now, this is a topic that I do chat about on this channel quite often, right? Being present with intense emotions, maintaining emotional strength during tough times. This right here relates to that. Often it is our relationship with emotions, our relationship with these uncomfortable emotions that get in the way of this powerful practice of non-reactivity, of not identifying with the mind, ultimately recognizing our truest essence. When it can be as simple as setting this intention to observe these uncomfortable feelings, may they be shame, may they be guilt, may they be fear or anxiety, right? When we are learning what it is that is distracting us, when we are learning and being fully aware of the reason why we're not stepping into such a powerful practice that we know so much about, this actually gives us the space to no longer fear it. It gives us the space, the awareness, this expansiveness, right? To not be so caught up in this limited way of thinking. And when I say this, often uncomfortable emotions are tied with periods in the past that we don't want to relive. This is why we find ourselves suppressing emotions. This is why we find ourselves continuously running away. This is why we find that we aren't exposed and shown these new practices that can allow us to notice that these emotions aren't as bad as we thought. These thoughts that arise, they can't control us as much as the mind thought it would. So when we choose to find comfort in non-reactivity, just genuinely noticing, pausing for a moment, inviting in a peaceful pause. A peaceful pause is a brief, intentional moment of calm, alert awareness. By inviting that in, we remain rooted in being, present in the moment. When we're fully present, these thoughts, they do not affect us. When we're fully present, the egoic mind problems, they dissolve. They don't exist in the moment because there is no critiquing, there is no judgment. And even if this is only for a moment, right? A peaceful pause, it can be for a moment, it could be for an hour, it can be for days, it could be for the rest of your life, it doesn't matter. Each of our spiritual journeys are unique and different. So when you honor where you are right now, you honor inviting in a peaceful pause. It's in that moment that you have transcended that intrusive thought. You have transcended the disturbing thought, the heavy emotion. Even if it's for 5 seconds, that is your moment to fully be there in the moment, unattached, no longer absorbed in the thought stream. Once again, this is a practice. You can even think of it as a skill for the moment, right? It's a practice until it's not. I always share that. It's a practice until it's not. The more you invite this in, the easier it is. You'll find yourself resilient. You'll find that this resilient, it doesn't take so much energy from you. In fact, it takes no energy at all because you're tapped into your truest essence. You are the flow of life. There's no resistance. So your relationship with uncomfortable emotions can also be the reason why you find that it's difficult to be in observation or just non-reactivity, right? And by the way, I'd like to share that observation, it doesn't mean that you are staring at the thought and you're just staring at it. Observation, I recognize that tends to be a misconception, and that's okay. That's all right. I can understand when I think about observe a thought, it might seem as though you have to just stare at a thought. In a way it is, but it has more to do with your state of being. Allowing the thought to arise and fall. Often if you're staring at the thought and expecting the thought to just stay there, right? That's what the mind may think with observation. If you're observing something, you're there, and what you're observing, it just remains the same. But the difference is with observing the thought is that when you observe the thought, immediately there's a shift. The thought may dissolve. The thought may rise and fall. Or the thought might stay there, but ultimately there's still a shift where you are not attached to it or absorbed in it. Ultimately that thought does go away. That's what I'd like to share with you, right? And often this brings me to the next reason is as to why you may find difficulty in non-reactivity and observing thought is the expectation of control. This expectation that because you observed a thought, because you chose non-reactivity, that you must be able to control the thought. And that is actually what causes more resistance. That causes the deepening of this feeling of suffering, this feeling of not being at ease with the moment, aligned with the moment, present with the moment, is that need to control. See, this whole practice, this whole powerful spiritual practice of non-identification with the mind, observation without judgment, non-reactivity, it's all based on surrender, relinquishing control, receiving the moment as it is. That control it reveals that there is an expectation. When you honor these spiritual practices, you're letting go of the expectation. So recognize in those moments when you have this expectation of instant control. Instant control has more to do with ego, the false sense of self, this need to control. But as you honor your truest self, your truest essence, control is not necessary. It's not needed, because you recognize that these intrusive thoughts, these disturbing thoughts, they cannot hurt you. It's not an indication of your character. It's not an indication of something you want or something you're striving for. It's not an indication of that. And ultimately, it is normal to receive and to witness these thoughts. Leave it be, right? Because the more we try to fight it, it's the more we become it, the more we take in that energy. So don't engage with it. You don't need to step into that stream of thinking. You don't need to step into the energy field. Choosing non-reactivity is the most powerful practice when it comes to it. You're not fighting it. There's no need to fight it. You're not fighting it. You're just there. Fades away. It wants your attention. It wants your validation. That's how it stays alive. Through the expectation of control, it's still feeding it because you're validating it. It makes sense? So be aware of that, right? Another reason why you may find that observing or being non-reactive towards a thought is difficult is because it conflicts with a personal belief that you have, a value that you have. You might find that you are, you might find that you are a kind-natured person. You might find and identify with being a peaceful person, a kind person, but then a thought comes up and it's violent or aggressive. And it's difficult to just be there in non-reactivity because it's going against a value. It's going against a belief. I find that this is a perfect moment to let go of this idea of who you think you are. Because even though perhaps you truly are a person who is at peace, a person who is kind, it is the attachment to this identity, this attachment to this is who I am, this is who I need to be. It's that attachment that is ultimately getting in the way of this powerful spiritual practice. The spiritual practice is the spiritual practice, it dissolves all identity. It dissolves all of who you think you are, of all of who you think you have to be, right? Once again, presence is no longer identifying with a label, with who you have to be. You have nothing to prove and you have no identity to protect. When you are non-reactive, there's no need to protect this identity of being peaceful and kind, even though this intrusive thought of aggression arises. And so when you're fully aware of that, you allow yourself to just be untethered to the mind, untethered to identity, not identified with the mind, thoughts, emotions. Starting to get the vibration here. And the last reason I'd like to share with you as to why you may find that observing thought can be difficult is mistaking these thoughts for reality. And this does tie into what we have been chatting about, right? You might believe that, once again, this thought that arises, you may not be able to tell the difference between it being normal and it being an intrusive thought, right? Ultimately, thoughts are thoughts, but we find more of a disturbance with an intrusive thought, right? An intrusive thought, it'll bring up those uncomfortable emotions. It'll bring up the shame, the judgment, and the anxiety. We'll find ourselves confused in the moment. A thought that is not intrusive, it will align with our intention. It'll align with our purpose. We'll feel in this flow state, right? So often, mistaking these thoughts for reality is often the reasons why we may find that it is difficult to observe thoughts. As I'm here and sharing, I find that this was a pretty substantial message and video, and I will continue to chat about intrusive thoughts. I'll dive deeper into it. I find that this right here is one of the first steps in is recognizing, so why aren't I non-reactive to it? Why aren't I just observing it, and how can I do it, right? If you would like to deepen this practice, I encourage you to check out my free ebook, Peaceful Pauses, The Calm Beyond the Overstimulated Mind. This ebook, it shares how to invite in this powerful practice of a brief moment of calm, alert awareness. This is a practice where you are in non-reactivity, non-identified with the mind. This is a practice where the stimuli, these intrusive thoughts within the mind, right, when you're too absorbed in them, that is when you are overstimulated. It happens within our inner world. Overstimulation can be caused by the outer and inner world, right? It's not just from social media or always being on certain devices. Although that does have an effect, it's often we find ourselves overstimulated by these intrusive thoughts. So check out that ebook where I dive into 7 topics and 7 ways you can invite peaceful pausing into your life. If you enjoyed these ebooks, I encourage you to register for my course, Peaceful Pauses for the Overstimulated Mind, a meditation course, where I share with you and show you that life is already a meditation. I take you along this powerful journey of 7 inspirational messages and 7 guided meditations that show you and help you recognize your truest essence that is inseparable from life itself, helping you to reduce stress and understand more the pattern of thought. If you enjoyed this topic, this course is for you. Prioritize your state of consciousness, prioritize your state of being, prioritize yourself. Once again, intrusive thoughts are normal. There's no need to feel shame or guilt. I honor you. I honor your journey and your practice. My name is Morcie. I'm sending you peace. I'm sending you love, wholeness.